is yours when you're ready.
Lovely. Thank you. Really glad to be back. Earlier today, I had the privilege of working with a panel just talking about a lot of these topics anyway. So it was really great to talk with them. Now I have a decent number of slides. I'm going to go through the first 8 really quickly, and then we'll dive into more of the main discussion. I also welcome questions as they come in. Since I'm screen sharing, I can't see all of them, so I'll try to answer them as soon as I'm done. But with that, let's dive in. So, as mentioned, my name is Megan. I founded the Digital Therapeutics Alliance in 2017, and I worked alongside Pierre Laurent from Volentis, really trying to figure out how to bring this to life. So, as we moved into this, our goal is to really educate and engage with the end user. So, patients, clinicians, payers, policymakers, regulatory agencies, all the other entities who are figuring out how do they use these products, how do they understand what they are, how do they recognize them, and really implement them in a meaningful way in practice. So, within this broad digital health technology ecosystem, this is something I created. It is not comprehensive, and it will continue to evolve. But really wanted to point out that we really operate in this specific area. So digital therapeutics can be used alongside of and with other technologies as laid out here. But what I'm focusing on mostly today in my description really is the idea that digital therapeutics are using software to directly impact a disease state. And that is listed here. So this is our current definition. We're talking about this in a way where you're intentionally impacting or treating, preventing, or managing a disease with software. They can be used alongside of medications, alongside of in-person therapies, sometimes even in place of them. So what we're trying to do as we move forward is really look at this idea of the core principles. There are 10 principles that we created in 2017 and 18, looking at if you're going to claim to be a DTx, how do you actually demonstrate that you have the level of rigor and quality that one would expect as a patient or an end user in the process? So they touch on a wide range of areas, looking at what they do, the intended use, looking at how their mechanism is delivered through the software, not necessarily through a clinician or other entity. And then how do they engage patients every step of the way? How do they protect patient privacy and really ensure security? How do they deploy and keep that life cycle live and active? And then how do they evaluate them? Using clinical trials, using real world evidence and outcomes, really demonstrating that impact throughout the entirety of the product lifecycle. Uh, Not spending much time here, but a wide range of ways that digital therapeutics can really deliver their impact. Some are listed here. This will continue to grow. And then a large number of disease states. I wanted to provide this just to expand the horizon of what we're speaking about today. The notion that these products are only for mental health or only for diabetes wouldn't really be accurate. So I wanted to at least address these are the types of indications that even 2 years ago I found that our member companies had either already developed a DTX for or are in the process of developing one. So a lot more to come, but at least providing this as like a baseline starting point. Value of digital therapeutics. There are many. So there are a lot of ways that we can use these products. We can use them to optimize clinical outcomes, use them to deliver therapies to patients who wouldn't otherwise have access to them. They're scalable. Generally, digital therapeutics are used on a patient-owned device. They may have other plugins, so there could be hardware associated with it. I'm happy to discuss any of that later too. But really enables the clinician in many ways, or an employer, or another payer or decision maker, whoever is the authorizing entity, to really extend that level of care outside of a traditional four-wall clinic or outside of a virtual care appointment and really engage in the patient's day-to-day life. So a lot of different things here that digital therapeutics have such great potential to actually deliver on. So let's talk about, though, now I'll slow down a little bit. Let's talk about what this all looks like. So from the onset, we've been looking at how do we actually scale a new category of medicine. Some examples are provided here of considerations we are making. So first off, looking at really that industry foundation. What are the definitions? What are the core principles? what really establishes what a DTx is versus some other products, and then enables more clarity in the industry. That moves us along to regulatory. Generally, digital therapeutics are medical devices, so you need to have some form of regulatory oversight. And different, we'll talk about that in a moment, but different agencies will determine the level of oversight necessary based upon the risk and the indication of the product. Commercialization, sure, you can get regulatory clearance, but then you have to be able to commercialize and deliver it into the market. Payer assessment is a really big one. How do decision makers determine if it's right for their patients, their populations? How do they determine what the economic impact is? And then the clinician engagement. Without clinicians in many of these, it's really difficult to have a therapy being delivered to patients without clinician engagement. So as Anne from Germany's program, the DIGA side, mentioned earlier, having clinicians engage, educating them, really enabling them with the technologies they need to use these products is really important. Also, how are they actually used in practice? So the idea where you could have a digital therapeutic being used is grand, but how do they actually fit into the clinical care practice in ecosystem? Do you start digital therapeutics at the same time as drugs? Do you start maybe a medication first and then a DTx, DTx first, then medication? All of those notions across clinical guidelines are really important to integrate these products into so clinicians know how to best use them. And then on the patient side, how do they benefit? How do they understand what their care is supposed to be changed into? How is the impact supposed to be delivered? And then how is care optimized overall? There are likely others to mention on the slide. I know there are many, but this at least gives you some indication as to how we've been thinking about this new category of medicine. Albeit 10 years old, a lot still to be developed. So one of the first things that we've been looking at more recently, I should say, is looking at how do we actually build the definition and move it from an industry-generated definition into one that's recognized by standard-setting bodies. So what we've embarked on is a process with ISO and IEC, two standard-setting organizations, on how do we define digital therapeutics, but then how do we create the right standards to really codify what this category is, what the expectations are, and really bring it into that level of rigor that is appropriate to the class of the technology. So let's look, so that's one step, definition. And then we have to look at regulatory frameworks. So right now, there are a number of regulatory frameworks that are being developed based upon what the International Medical Device Regulators Forum has created, the SAMD framework. Digital therapeutics are a subset of SAMD. Not all SAMD products are DTx, but at least that's at least a starting point for us. So US, Canada, many others have used this. Japan and South Korea have been implementing their own regulatory frameworks. So what we did within DTA is we took the approach of starting to outline this on our website. We have 8 countries where we've looked at and said, what is the regulatory pathway, and then what is the reimbursement pathway for digital therapeutics? We put these out earlier this year. In some cases, like the United States, not much change has likely occurred. In other cases, such as South Korea or Germany and now France, significant changes will have occurred. So this is just a way for us to start to clarify what are the current pathways that exist, and then really help us and help the manufacturers understand how do you start to navigate through those. Again, you get regulatory access, that's great, but really this notion around reimbursement and patient access is a really critical one. So on our discussion earlier today, we discussed 2 of these frameworks. We looked at what Belgium has been doing, and we looked at what Germany has been doing. The UK has also been a really strong leader in this space. So looking toward their framework is really interesting, I think, for everyone who's just looking to get a sense of how are other government entities classifying and regulating these products. France, as we mentioned, they are coming soon, and we've been expecting this, I think, since June. So we hope every month we're getting closer. But they will be releasing a program that's reimbursement access program, somewhat based upon Germany's program, the DIGA one that was mentioned, and then also then incorporating other aspects from the ATAP program and others that have already existed in France. So keeping an eye out there would be grand. that then leads us into what the States is doing. So in many ways, the countries mentioned here are, I would say, generally a single payer system, or at least public payment is the predominant payment pathway. In the United States, we have two different pathways generally. We have the private and then the public side. On the private side, patients are generally able to receive access to digital therapeutics. Um, Public side, however, much more complicated. At this point, Medicare and Medicaid don't have a classification way for them to actually recognize what a digital therapeutic is. So while there are some products that kind of fit into some of this, they don't really, they can't really be coded as such and therefore not provided to patients, which is a health inequity issue all around the board. So DTA, we've been working with a coalition of other companies looking at how do we actually advocate for Medicare and Medicaid to recognize what a digital therapeutic is, create a classification for these products, and then start to look at what are the requirements for a digital therapeutic to be made available to a patient. So work is underway, but it's taking a little bit of time and is very unpredictable in terms of when all this will come into final fruition. So what I'm going to do is spend a couple of moments on this value assessment guide, give you some of the reason as to what it is, why we've undertaken it, and then I'll focus on the European Coalition, which is, I know, the title of the presentation, but it's all building up to it. So value assessment guide. We recognize, as I was mentioning this, even let's use the United States as an example. On the private side, as I mentioned, digital therapeutics can get coverage by a private payer. There are many different private payers out there. There are employers, there are pharmacy benefit managers, there are different health systems, different health plans, a wide range of different payers. What they're responsible for, though, is when they want to bring a new technology into play, unless there's a pre-existing guideline and a pathway for them to use, which there currently isn't for digital therapeutics, they all have to make up their own requirements. And therefore, you get this patchwork of all these different requirements for all these different health systems, looking for all this different type of data, security, privacy, different insurance coverage requirements, and so forth. So really that really inhibits scalability from happening, and therefore patient access doesn't occur as easily as it could had there been a standardized process to follow. So what we've done is we've started to put together this document, and this document is available on our website. It's a 54-page document. I think the 84-page one is a member-only benefit, but they all have very similar content. But the first question is, let's help a decision maker understand what this is. So is this a DTx? If you have a product in front of you, how do you even know what it is or isn't? So we recommend going through this, and it really tries to get at the notion that it's the software that is the intervention. It's not necessarily clinical decision support. It's not a diagnostic. It's not a monitoring tool. It's not adherence. It really is the software that is delivering that impact. From there, we then walk into where do DTx therapies fit in healthcare? And again, this could be drawn in 100 different ways, but it's just the way that I chose to go about it. If you have products that are in the monitoring, the diagnostic, the treatment decision, and then the actual treatment and ongoing care realms, a lot of different product options on the non-clinical grade side and the clinical grade side. Digital therapeutics fall on the clinical grade side and are in that treatment and ongoing care. Again, as I mentioned earlier, they can work with all these different therapies in conjunction in different platforms or systems, but really try to get a sense of what these are and where they fit. From there, we try to start laying out many pages worth of ideas for decision makers. How do you actually start approaching this? What questions are you looking for? What kinds of ideas? Is it just a health app? I hope the answer by this point, when they'd be going through this, would be no. So we're looking at what are the approved indications, the directions for use, the duration of therapy, the dosing regimen, all these things that you would use in correlation to a medication, but really it's DTx specific. After that, then we go into really this implementation perspective. So yes, you can evaluate, but we really, really want to deliver these to patients. So how do people start to think about how these are delivered? And this is the first step for us where we walk through some of this notion around how do you target patients? What's the outreach? How do you activate? How do you engage? How do you support? And then there are many other topics related to clinician support and other forms of assessment. So this is our first attempt. We know this is a first attempt though. So part of this now is how do we actually make this more meaningful and usable to different entities, whether it's country specific, whether it is based upon the type of entity it is, or otherwise. So now this comes to the next step. Where do we go from here? How do we engage? And how do we start to better understand what the ecosystem is so we can weave this into it and make sure that we're reducing duplication and really highlighting areas where we can be of most use? Leads us to the European DTx Policy Coalition. Only took me 20 minutes to get here. So with this is our entire goal to start at least, and we know this will be evolving, but we have been working with Healthware, who is based out of Italy, as our resource partner on this. And we've been looking at how do we bring together different entities in Europe to really talk about what are the existing frameworks and terminology that are being used. How do we discuss potential areas of harmonization? And some of the questions I asked in the previous session tie into this. Are we looking at the process of how digital therapeutics go through in different countries? Or are we looking at more of the requirements? And can we harmonize the requirements across the processes, knowing that our goal and impact will never be to change how Germany or Bulgaria or Lithuania actually implement their review systems? So that has been the goal from the onset, and then developing a publication of some sort that really is hopefully meaningful and usable and actionable. Target impact. I mean, ideally, we're looking at trying to help with policy development and also refining policies that have already been developed. Education is a really big one. Who are we educating? I think at this point, we're looking more at that policymaker, decision maker level. But then as we go, as we've mentioned, if we leave out the clinicians, there's going to be no success. If we leave out the patients, there's no value. So how do we really build this out to make sure that we're either directly helping educate or helping enable the education of these different entities? Landscape clarity is a really big one. I think oftentimes it's assumed by external parties, at least I can say, well, Europe, it's one big market and it should just be one big place you can go. And once you have one submission, it should work for everywhere, which we know is not the case. But it's something that we're trying to figure out. How can we provide more clarity into what exists? But then also, how do we start to make a shift toward alignment where appropriate, either at that national level, at the regional level, or even the global level? What's taking place here in Europe? There are a lot of eyes on it. As I've been talking about, I've been able to meet with some policymakers in different regions. A lot of people are curious what's taking place. Which systems or aspects of systems could we adopt or can we evolve to make useful in our region? So even though a lot of the discussion is Europe specific, there's a lot of interest, I think is a fair way to say it, globally. So what we want to do is we want to further grow our community. Right now, highlighted on the map are some of the entities that we've been working with, and we really do want to expand. And I think being here and hearing just some of the different countries mentioned makes me really excited, and I really know that we're missing out on some really good engagement. So how do we better engage with the rest of Europe? How do we better engage with other countries who have already started on pathways, who have so many ideas to share? So this is something that I even want to use as part of my time, whether it's something of putting in something in the chat. I would welcome engagement. I would love to connect with your teams. What we're ideally looking for at this point, though, is to really work with the institutional level. So at this point in our coalition, we've been conducting a lot of one-on-one meetings and bringing together this coalition of different entities at the government level or the National Trade Association level. It's difficult to weave in individual companies into this discussion. So what we're trying to do is use a lot of these discussions, whether it's here or at Frontiers Health that I'll mention next slide, to talk with the industry. What are the barriers? How are you facing different challenges? How can we overcome it? And then keep the coalition meetings really focused on engaging with HTA bodies and different regulatory agencies and different industry representatives who can speak to the entire industry within their country or region, as opposed to being there representing a singular product. So that's at least where what we're looking to do is to really intentionally grow this in a way that represents the full community and not just some aspects of it, of Europe. Um, and here's some examples of lessons. So second to last slide. As I've mentioned, we've probably had 20 different interviews so far, mostly with government agency leaders and, as I mentioned, trade associations. Talking to them. What are you seeing? What are you needing? How can we engage further? And here are some of the lessons that I've taken away. So first of all, baseline terminology is really complicated. While digital health is fairly well understood, a digital health technology versus a digital health intervention versus a mobile health product or an e-health product, m-health product, and then SAMD versus digital medical device, and I know there are many others. There's a lot of different ways the terminology is being used. What's interesting though is oftentimes if you see digital health technology being used in one country, another country may also use that, but define it completely differently and have a completely different methodology. So for manufacturers, that's incredibly confusing as to where you fit, what you have to do. So if there are any ways that we could start to bring some clarity, at least in the DTx space, to say digital therapeutics as defined by ISO and or others is this. They are a subset of SAMD. They may be related to the digital medical device category because they're medical devices and they fall under broader umbrellas of whatever the case is. Could be a thing we discuss, not sure. Digital health technology evaluation frameworks. We've been speaking with a number of different countries who have mentioned that they're working on something right now. So even though we've been talking again about Germany, Belgium, and UK, many others are going to be coming up online soon, which is incredibly exciting, but really shows that it's like the perfect time for us to really start to talk about areas of harmonization across these different regions. Different levels of readiness came up earlier today also. What a national level may be ready to do and implement may be very different than the local level. So even if we can say it's fantastic that in this country, the national bodies have created a reimbursement framework and an access framework and we're ready to go, the local levels, if they're not prepared, it may not actually happen. So that's something that has been brought up on numerous occasions. And then the idea too that not all countries have the ability to develop their own frameworks is something that has been mentioned. So is there a way that different groups like ours or others, which we would love to work with anyone else on this? I know that EIT Health is working on some things, and I learned a lot about just the European Commission level from 2 sessions ago, which was fantastic. So how do we all work together? How do we not duplicate efforts, but really support the needs that exist? And then the last two here is the looking at the idea of barriers. So examples of barriers could really be helpful for this group, this coalition group of regulatory agencies and trade associations to really bring clarity to what this is. Oftentimes I hear people say things like, oh, data is a really hard one. But I really need to find out like what specifically about data. Like let's dive down into that a few tiers down to really understand the nuances of what the issue is so we can convey that and then again see if there are ways to potentially solve it. And then developing case studies is helpful too. So what the questions I have moving forward are, and I know we have 3 or 4 minutes and there's probably not the perfect time to be able to talk on a long Q&A after this, but questions. I would love to really enlarge in and make much more representative Europe are countries and geographies of focus that are already engaged. So that's one area. We'd love to talk with people who have insights or ideas of people they think may be qualified or interested, even interested in this to start. I also am looking for a better understanding of what the European or global efforts are that we should be incorporating and or reviewing and or engaging with directly. We've been speaking to some of the larger entities at the Brussels level, trying to get their read on things, but oftentimes they say, hey, we're staying at the Brussels level, the national level, you'll have to go talk with these different entities. So it's been interesting to see who's doing what, how they're doing it, but really want to make sure we're being inclusive. Country frameworks. If you know that a specific country is developing of digital health technology or DTx specific framework would love to know that, just to make sure that we know what's going on. If we could reach out and find ways to support them, or at least inform them of what we're doing, that would be fantastic. Same with industry frameworks, as they come up, different groups, whether the psychologist groups or different endocrinologists, they may have frameworks, or it could be broader ones like EIT Health or others. So those are all areas that I'm looking to ask a lot of questions in and learn a lot in. And then the Frontiers Health meeting listed here, we'll be hosting a meeting for anyone who may be attending that meeting. We would love for you to come and join our session. We're trying to bring together the coalition members and industry leaders to talk about case studies, barriers, enablers, and really look at what the framing is here. So with that, I will pause. I will stop sharing and see if there are questions that have arisen in the meantime. And if not, happy to carry on.
Thank you so much, Megan. This was truly a wonderful talk, and you're honestly a great speaker. I want to compliment you because it was really enjoyable for me to hear you speak. Just to remind everyone that there is a BitMatch networking/matchmaking platform that we are using. So if you would like to connect either with speakers or just between attendees, you can use that and just continue the conversation there, since we don't have much time to answer a lot of questions right now, as we have only 2 minutes. And with that being said, we do have 2 questions here. And the first one is based on the last bit of your presentation about barriers that you're facing. I'm going to paraphrase it because it's a bit long. I guess what he wants to ask is, what is the biggest hurdle that we need to face first in order to move forward quickly and globally? I know this is probably a long reach, but what are your thoughts?
So we started with the value guide as in the DTX space, at least as a starting point. If there are people who are looking to understand what is this, how do I even approach it from a policymaker side or a reimbursement side, it's a starting point. Our next point is, as we laid out, really trying to bring people together, understand the needs, really start to get the sense that harmonization is important and necessary, build that expectation, and then see how we can actually harmonize on that. The commercialization aspects are going to be really important too, but in single payer systems where there is a really strong gatekeeping perspective, as much as we can do to work with the entities to understand what their needs are and how we help them, that's at least been our approach.
I agree. Thank you so much. And the next one, it says, so what is the key to reach evidence-based and evidence-supported digital therapeutics without actually limiting innovations?
Oh, so we are about to put out in the next month or two a paper on what is clinical evidence sufficiency for digital therapeutics. So it's a starting point again. It's not going to solve everyone's problems, but we're trying to allude to, if you're at different stages, you will have different levels of evidence likely required. And as you advance in stages, the levels of evidence will increase. But we're trying to at least convey that digital therapeutics need to have a DTX set standard and not always have to align with the pharmaceutical standard or medical device standard, that we can pull from these different standards, but really it has to be a fit for purpose paradigm for evidence. So that's something that we'll be working on and promoting in the next short bit of time.
Thank you so much. Everyone else, if you do have questions, drop them to us and we will try to forward them to Megan later on. Thank you so much, Megan, again for joining us
Thank you,
and
everyone.
for contributing
Nice to see you
so
all today.
much. You too. It was truly amazing.